Oh yeah. I'm about to drop some particle physics in the club. The LHC is super duper fly. You know what I'm saying. Check it.
27 kilometers tunnel underground, designed with mind to send protons around. A circle that crosses through Switzerland and France. 60 nations contribute to scientific advance. 2 beams of protons swing round through the ring they ride, till in the hearts of the detectors their mates collide, and all that energy packed in such a tiny bit of room becomes mass particles created from the vacuum, and then
oh yeah.
LHCb sees where the antimatter's gone. Alice looks at collisions of lead ions. CMS and Atlas are 2 of a kind. They're looking for whatever new particles they can find. The LHC accelerates the protons in the lead, and the things that it discovers will rock you in the head. We see asteroids and planets, stars galore. We know a black hole resides at each galaxy's core. But even all that matter cannot explain what holds all these stars together. Something else remains. The dark matter interacts only through gravity. And how do you catch a particle? There's no way to see. Take it back to conservation of energy, and the particles appear clear as can be. You see particles flying in jets they spray, but you notice there ain't nothing going the other way. You say my law has just been violated. That don't make sense. There's gotta be another particle to make this balance, and it might be dark matter. And for the first time we catch a glimpse of what was from most of the known verse, because LHCb sees where the antimatter's gone. Alice looks at collisions of lead ions. CMS and Atlas are 2 of a kind. They're looking for whatever new particles they can find. Antimatter is sort of like matter's evil twin, because except for charge and handedness of spin, they're the same for a particle and its anti-self. But you can store an antiparticle on a new shelf, cause when it meets its normal twin, they both annihilate. Matter turns to energy and then it dissipates. When matter is created from energy, which is exactly what they'll do in the LHC, you get matter and antimatter in equal parts. And they try to take this back to when the universe starts, the Big Bang, back when all the matter exploded. But the amount of antimatter was somehow eroded, because when we look around we see that matter abounds, but the antimatter's nowhere to be found. That's why when LHCb sees where the antimatter's gone, Alice looks at collisions of lead ions. CMS and Atlas are 2 of a kind. They're looking for whatever new particles they can find. The LHC accelerates the photons in the lead, and the things that it discovers will rock you in the head.
Oh yeah. Our understanding of the universe is about to change, thanks to the Large Hadron Collider. This is C to the E to the R to the N, coming straight out of Geneva.
Mr. B dropping the beats.
Alpine Cat, over and out.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the program this week. I'm very excited for this week's episode. I feel like I always say that because I'm always excited for this week's episode. I am a board member of a group called the Society for the Anthropology of Consciousness. It's a subgroup of another group of academics called the American Association of Anthropologists, which is the oldest academic institution in the United States. Its membership is some 7,500 anthropologists from around the country that study all various branches of anthropology: medical anthropology, cultural anthropology, linguistic anthropology, biological anthropology, and so forth. And the Society for the Anthropology of Consciousness is a fascinating group, actually, of international thinkers and practitioners, some doing field work in great places like Papua New Guinea and Mongolia and Kuala Lumpur, and just on and on. People just traveling the world studying shamanism and altered states of consciousness and sort of the X-Files of the anthropological world. Genuine academics who are working in the field and in the classroom, studying religion and mythology and spirituality and, like I said, shamanism and plant intelligence and all of the various things that qualify, at least in a materialist worldview, as things that are on the fringes, things that we've dismissed for too long, I would suggest deep biological and chemical knowledge that is woven into our DNA, that has been there for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. Those places on the edges where the boundaries between us and other start to become more fluid and porous, and we see ourselves not only in other people, but in the plants and animals and very substance of the cosmos. I know that sounds like a bunch of woo and new age drivel to a lot of you, but these folks are serious and credentialed academics that go into the field and study this stuff seriously as an academic discipline. It's a fantastic group to be a part of. We were just this weekend at our yearly conference, and the theme of this year was Wisdom Sits in Places, following the work of Keith Bozzo, who suggested that placemaking involves multiple acts of remembering and imagining, which inform each other in complex ways, And my work as a mythologist, I've talked about this a lot, borrowing from Joseph Campbell, who frequently referred to the Icelandic tradition of land naming or land claiming, when a people migrate into a region and the particular aspects of that region start to inform their mythology. They pick a sacred mountain, they pick a center place, which symbolizes the place of emergence. And the people's mythology sets itself over the top of the landscape, and this dialectical relationship between the land and the air and the animals and the people begins. And as a mythologist, I've studied a lot about how people overlay onto the land our imprints, our ideas, our symbol systems that generate meaning. One of the things that's fascinating when we talk to eco-psychologists, among other disciplines, is that they also talk to us about how the land informs us, how the land makes us, in really interesting and fantastic and quantifiable ways. And so it's a brilliant group of folks with hearts as big as their minds, who just love the complexity of life, love all of our non-human brothers and sisters, and are constantly finding ways to use their academic credentials and discipline to expose us to truths about ourselves that are there and that are researchable, but that have been hidden for so long in this bifurcated existence we have in the Western world, where we drive a wedge between matter and spirit and the rational and the intuitive, and never the twain shall meet. And so it's a whirlwind to get together with these folks, and I always feel like I'm with family when I am. And this kid, Justin Panneck, he's no kid, he's, I guess, my age, maybe a little younger, is a doctor of psychology, and somebody that I met a couple of years ago at one of these conferences. And I've never met anybody like this guy. What a whirlwind of knowledge and humor and wit and bizarreness, right? When you meet the guy, he's so reserved and so dry, and only says a couple of words, and you think, all right, what's this guy all about, right? And then he gets up onto the stage or at the podium, and this force comes out of him of humor and insight and deep wisdom and long-ranging academic analysis across multiple disciplines. He uses humor in a way that increases our ability to feel the capacity to feel the weight of some of the truths that he's exposing. And I just love the guy to death, and I think I love him to life too, and I'm happy to know him. And he sat down with us a couple of months ago to talk about his life and his background and his work, and we hadn't aired the show for a bit because we had a lot of other things going on. But with the conference that we just held this weekend for the Society for the Anthropology of Consciousness, we thought it would be great to air his episode in honor of that. He is working in this region, studying fascinating things like Bigfoot and UFO phenomena, studying more the psychology of people that follow those phenomena. If any of you have seen the movie Incident at Loch Ness, I think that's a great meditation on this very thing. And again, a meditation on placemaking and myth, and how people inform from the one side but are informed by those things on the other. He gave a great paper this weekend at our conference entitled The Invisible Ambush insights into the wisdom of culture, consumerism, and modern mysteries. And again, the guy just tore the house down with his humor and his insight. So we're glad to have Justin Panneck for you this week. We appreciate you being with the show, folks. I want to give a special shout out to producer Mike DiNapoli. On the Block Radio is a labor of love here for us to make, as I've said many times, and I'm sure you see it as me groveling. We don't make any money doing the show, but what we do get is a great deal of satisfaction, or at least I do, seeing this vision brought to life, this kind of community art project brought, and this vision brought to life, and the guests we get to speak with, the music we play, the community work we're trying to do. It's very gratifying for me to finally see this vision brought to light. But the thing is, a lot of other folks work on this show, like Celeste Gurvich, Mike DiNapoli, Iris Stevenson. They do it for free. And Mike built the entire episode this week on his own because I was away at this conference. And so the music, the themes, the flow through the show, which is normally a collaborative effort, producer Mike did on his own, along with all the other things he does for us on a regular basis. And so while I'm certainly happy to start letting go of some of the controls and a bit of my manic need to micromanage, I'm very happy to have a team of people that are not only motivated and share the vision, but are creative in multiple capacities as well. So shout out to you, producer Mike. Shout out to you, listeners, for staying with us and being along for this crazy ride. And thank you, Justin Panneck, for sharing yourself and your soul with us and the rest of the world. All right, folks, enjoy this episode, and we will see you on the other side.
Welcome to On the Block with Andrew Gurevich, a podcast about authentic people doing beautiful things. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the program, folks. This is your host, Andy Gurevich, and we're sitting with Justin Panneck. Justin, welcome to the show.
Hi there.
How you doing, man? How's your day going?
Hey, pretty good. It's just kind of getting started, but yeah, I'm happy to talk to you and be on the show.
Yeah, we're glad to have you on. For our listeners, Justin and I met in a group that both of us belong to called the Society for the Anthropology of Consciousness. How long have you been involved with the SAC, Justin?
This would be, I believe, my third year.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, so not very long, but...
I think I've been involved only about 5, and so I'm just ahead of you. And I'm a board member of this organization, and you are as well now. Is that correct?
Yeah, just recently became a board member.
You were almost our president as well. So
yeah, just I guess by a couple of votes.
You are the Mitt Romney of consciousness.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding, man. So for a little bit about the SAC, and then we'll jump into your story, because I think it's an interesting group for folks to know about. The Society for the Anthropology of Consciousness is one of the subset specialist groups of the American Anthropological Association, which is the oldest academic organization in the United States. I think they've been active since like 1889 or something crazy like that, since Franz Boas and others invented anthropology, right?
Right.
And this is a subset of folks that study the nature of consciousness, which for anybody who follows this story is called the big question, right? This is the last giant question in terms of, from an anthropomorphic standpoint of understanding human existence that science is devoting itself to. And there are several camps established within those who are in this inquiry. And, just to break it down shortly for our audience, there's the materialist side of things that believe that consciousness is an emergent property of matter, that when matter hits a certain level of complex organization, that consciousness just somehow emerges from the material, inanimate world. And then there's another group of researchers that more and more start sounding like religious mystics, who say, according to Max Planck, like I said, we had Stephen Schwartz on the show earlier, and other physicists, and those who study, indigenous cultures and other aspects of human endeavors and human culture, that consciousness seems to be something that it exists independent and maybe is primary to the material world, not the other way around.
Right.
Within our group, I think there's folks on both sides of the issue. It's a group of anthropologists, archaeologists, psychologists, folks like me who study mythology and stuff. And so it's a fascinating group that I gave a paper. I went to a conference that I think in 2012 where I had submitted a paper that I had written about the mythological significance of Paleolithic cave art. And they gobbled it up, and you know, it was a terrifying thing for me to go to because I'm looking out in the audience and there's Stan Krippner and, you know, Sharon Maharis and Richard Katz and these big names in the study in the field, and I don't have an anthropology degree, right? My background is in something else, and so it was the first conference I ever presented at as well. But they were great folks, and they welcomed me in. And one of the things I really like about them is they're interdisciplinary.
Right.
And so it's not just made up of anthropologists. How did you? We'll get to your story in a second, but how did you come about? How did you come to the group?
Well, so I started out really in sort of a mainstream, clinical psychology track, and at the time when I was in grad school, I started experiencing a lot of anxiety, and I wasn't really taking care of myself really, and I started taking some some sort of nutritional advice is how it started. And I realized that I can take care of myself. And then, so I started doing all this research on shamanism and eco-psychology, which basically is kind of, our connection to nature. Yeah. And I knew that was key, this connection to nature, this lost connection. And that led me on this path of eventually studying plant medicines.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so I had planned basically to go to South America and study some shamans and do ayahuasca. And I told a friend about it. He's like, "You don't have to go there. You can just do it here, man." And he introduced me to the Santo Daime Church. I had my first ayahuasca experience. This was probably 6 years ago. And wow, I mean, this was the answer. This is exactly what I was looking for. And it just, it was like a sort of a creative Chernobyl for me. It was just this explosion of creativity. I saw thousands of years of history in the flash of a second. I mean, it was just incredible.
And you did that here in the States?
Yeah, here in good old Portland.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I want to back up in a minute and then kind of come back up to that, and we'll dive into that experience a little more. But when you bring it up, we're going to have Stanley Krippner on the show in the coming weeks. And
excellent.
I was just listening to an interview he did on the Joe Rogan program, and they talked a little bit about this. And I want to explore it more when he comes on the show, but we'll explore it with you for a second, and then we'll jump into your story. Do you know a book called The Lost Language of Plants by Stephen Buhner?
I have come across that title. I have not read it, though.
Yeah, it's a really interesting book worth checking out, and it speaks kind of directly to what you just said, but from the plant's standpoint, not so much from ours. And one of the things I'm really fascinated in, our show here is about transformation, and a lot of the folks we talk to have talked about the use of plant hallucinogens as a conduit, as a catalyst for transformation. And it's not the only way for people to experience transformation, but it certainly is, a catapult for a lot of people into an elevated state of consciousness. One of the things that I think is really interesting, and I want to get your thoughts on it because I was thinking about it a lot last night, is this connection to nature thing. It's really interesting doing the work we do. I got an email from somebody a couple months ago. It's probably 6-8 months ago now, and he said, "Can I have your address? I want to send you something." And it's probably an envelope, full of anthrax or something, right? But I said, "Sure, man," and I gave him my school address actually. And then this folder shows up about a week later, and it's a binder full of photocopies and original typed papers written by Andrew Weil when he was in the Amazonian rainforest and when he was in Central and South America studying plant hallucinogens in the late 60s. And these are all unpublished papers.
Yeah.
And the guy just said, I worked for the organization that funded this, I had this, and I thought of you, and I thought you would like these. And he sent them to me. And so we read through them. And one of the things that I found was interesting is that Weil said, at least, that the mixture that's been given to folks has changed. That early on, datura was not added to the compound, and
Right.
the visual effects, the hallucinations come mostly from the datura component, and that from the best that he could tell from his studies of the original use of this by indigenous people, it wasn't to produce visions, it wasn't to reconcile themselves to their life or to their shitty childhood or to overcome trauma or any of the stuff that white folks use it for. And I'm not dismissing that, right? But that it was actually used to increase visual and audio acuity in hunting, and then also to in some way bring the hunter into alignment with the way of thinking of the animal. Right. And so this was the bridge that I thought is interesting and needs to be explored, because it hit when I thought of it that way, I thought of exactly what you just said, that for 10,000 years or so in this project of civilization, we have been increasingly moving ourselves away from an awareness of the natural world in terms of how our animal side thinks of it. And I think one of the and to great peril, I think, for our species, obviously, collectively and individually. And so I think when somebody has an experience like you just said, and exactly what you just said, through nutrition, through many different things, of an awareness in your body of your essential connectivity to the physical world and how its health is your health. I think that's the sort of genesis of this transformational experience. And I think that's what these plant intelligences bring to us, is they remind us of something we already know, but we've forgotten.
Yeah, it's what I call uncovering the creature. And I was just thinking about this last night and this morning, with the release of Star Wars. I'm a huge culture critic, and I like to and you probably remember this from my talk at the SAC conference last year, but I talked about cultural artifacts and how when we look at products, it could be food, it could be movies, especially movies, what we're seeing is a mirror of kind of our predicament, and which also includes where we want to be and some of the things that we need in our lives. So one example is I've noticed in all the advertisements and posts on Facebook, the Wookiee is just so ever present. Right? The Wookiee. And so that's the creature. It's like it represents, sure, we're moving away from nature, but it's obvious and clear that we realize that we need something that we're sort of unaware of exactly what that is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We're recording this episode for the listener to know, because we record them, and then who knows when we air these. But we're recording this on the actual day that the Star Wars movie is released. And we just had some folks on the show a few weeks ago as part of a group called Octavia's Brood, which is a book that was written about the science fiction of Octavia Butler, and they had an audio essay that they played for us at the event from Mumia Abu Jamal. And it was on Star Wars, and his take on it was fascinating. He said that Star Wars, when it came out in the mid 70s, gave America, after Vietnam, was shell shocked literally, and the public was suddenly aware of the fact that this narrative that we were the underdog fighting these evil empires, it was finally washed away entirely. You know what I mean? In World War II, which is why Spielberg's so obsessed with making World War II movies, in World War II you could still play that idea that we are this underdog going to fight this evil empire and save the day for the good guys, right? But by the time Vietnam hit and this asymmetrical for-profit warfare that we've been involved in ever since, that narrative is gone, and suddenly we are that empire, right? And that was such a shocking thing for the American public to try to digest, that Star Wars gave us a way to kind of skirt around that and go, no, because nobody identifies with the Empire. Everyone identifies with the rebels and with Luke and with Han Solo and whatever, right? And so it gave the American public this narrative excuse to go identify with the underdog and with the rebels again. It was a fascinating take.
Yeah, and that's why I think cynicism is so, in every blog that you visit, every YouTube video, there's rampant cynicism.
Yeah.
And I think that represents kind of this scarcity of being, this feeling of, I'm not enough, or there's not enough life, and it never lets us rest. And it's a consequence of our alienation and our sort of our abandonment to what we think of as a dead, purposeless universe. But I love conspiracy theories. I'm not like a conspiracy guy.
Yeah.
But I like to study them to find out what's really going on.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of it is it's about a sort of collective shadow. Something has overtaken the world, and we don't know what it is. It's obviously it's corporations and blah 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 blah. But it's an interesting thing to at least kind of immerse yourself in and study.
You know what I've noticed? We're going to go to break here in a second, and I want to actually get the last part of the question I asked you, but then I diverted us. But since you just brought it up, one of the things that I think is fascinating that I seem to see popping up everywhere all of a sudden, and maybe I just haven't been paying attention, but the Sandy Hook truthers seem to be coming out of the woodwork at the moment. Have you followed this conspiracy theory that the Sandy Hook shooting didn't happen at all?
Yeah,
and that this was a false flag event.
Right.
And, that's what's fascinating to me. Is the timing of it. It seems lately, literally over the past couple of weeks, every time I turn on social media, there's someone on about this. Which I think is something else. But the question I had for you was how you got into the SAC. So you partially answered it. Right.
Yeah. So I had after that ayahuasca experience, I started attending this church on a regular basis and doing ayahuasca and taking notes and writing and I joined a research group. It's an ayahuasca research group that I'm currently a part of, and there are over 100 scholars from around the world. Many are top in their field, and their lives have been changed by ayahuasca, and so they've devoted their scientific careers to studying it. And I think there's a couple of SAC people in this research group, and so someone had mentioned the conference, and I was like, "Oh, this sounds great." I have found, even though I'm a psychologist, most of my colleagues tend to be anthropologists.
Yeah.
Right. So it sounded perfect. I submitted, I submitted a little piece for a talk, and it was accepted. So. And I loved it. I loved the group, such a diverse interdisciplinary group, and so I was hooked.
Yeah, it's a really interesting group of scholars. For me, from my background, there's a couple of hinge points where I think human intelligence and creativity really took a blow, and one of those that we talk about a lot on the show and in my writing is the sort of beginning of civilization and large scale agriculture. But the other one is in the Middle Ages. When we really committed ourselves to this kind of split in the sensibilities between the rational mind and the intuitive mind, and I think there have been academics who have popped through that, and including people like Einstein, who have said we absolutely have to get over this artificial divide because one informs and nourishes the other, and to do good science you have to have intuition, and to explore the mystery of the world you should be rooted in good science so you don't fall over into ghosts and goblins. And so one of the things I love about the SAC is that there's this kind of commitment to rigorous scientific-based investigation, but also a total openness and awareness of the fact that the universe is far more mysterious than our models, especially our left brain dominant models, have led on to date. And so I love that it's scholars that aren't afraid of having that conversation without compromising the data set.
Right.
Yeah, which I think is great. Well, we're going to go to break. We're going to go to our first break. And when we come back, I actually want to, in our second segment, back up a little bit and start talking about your life and growing up in Arkansas and military experience and all that rest of that, because that's a fascinating thing. When I read your the summary you sent me, I was like, oh, no. I want to go more into a couple of those things. And so we'll dive off into that after the break. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, folks, you're listening to On the Block Radio. Our guest is Justin Panneck. This is your host, Andy Gurvich, and we'll be right back.
Thanks for listening to On the Block. Talk is cheap, ours is free. Be right back.
Hey everybody, this is producer Mike, coming out from behind the scenes and hitting the streets of Portland, Oregon to ask a question that's been just grinding my gears. Can psychedelics be used as medicine? Do psychedelics raise consciousness? You tell me.
Never tried them. Scientifically speaking, it would scare the crap out of me, but hey, I'd hate to be a hypocrite and say that it wouldn't be a good way to try it. I don't know.
I think so. I mean, I have no personal experience, only testimonies of poets and artists who are users, but I think that it depends on the person, also their emotional, mental situation and the environment that may be having guidance in using it, but absolutely. I think that, the brain's connection to all parts of our body is something we underestimate, so absolutely, yeah.
You got a quick second to answer a question? All right. So the question is, can psychedelics be used as medicine?
I would think so, yes.
Yeah?
Do you think so? I can't explain it, but I think, yes, I think it can help. But I don't think you should go crazy or anything like that. If it helps you, if there's a nervous problem or something, that maybe that'll help. I don't know. Right. But I'm not versed in all that.
Me either.
But you like to hold a microphone.
Well, we're curious. It's just like, what's going on, what people think, and what people's experience are with psychedelics.
Oh, no, I don't take psychedelics, but I think a lot of the medication they give you borders on psychedelics because you're not yourself sometimes. With some medications like antidepressants. Yeah, prescription, exactly. So it may not be to the best of some people's interest to be on a medication when they're getting off on it instead of getting better. That's my opinion. I don't know if that makes any sense. Yeah. Because you can get stuck on a drug, and if it's not making you any better, why take it? You could go off on another cloud or something.
So you're gambling with your sanity by taking it.
Right. Yes. Okay. That's all I can say. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Well, in my younger days, yeah, I've done some psychedelic drugs, but I think I turned out pretty fine myself.
Was it a path to self-knowledge, or do you think it was gambling with your sanity?
I was just experimenting, and I just wanted something different, and so, but yeah, it's all about living. I mean, honestly, you only got one, so you best use that thing up pretty well. And I've tried some crazy one, like it's even legal. Well, it was legal in my day. Salvia, this herb. Holy shit, that's the worst thing I've ever tried in my life. But sorry about the cursing and stuff. But I've tried shrooms and everything else like that. It's pretty mellow and stuff. But yeah, it's an experience that I guess all people should try. I mean, I don't think it's bad or anything like that. I mean, it's just something you should try when you're young and you have no kids or anything else like that. But I wouldn't suggest it to any parents or anything like that by the time. But other than that, yeah, it was cool. That was all right.
Great, thank you.
Depends on defining psychedelics. There are some things I would certainly not recommend anyone take.
Right. I think that's fair.
Like what?
Well, PCP would be a bad thing to do. LSD, control, might be okay. Right. Didn't hurt Timothy Leary much.
Right.
Okay?
Thank you very much. Have a great day. Ask you a question. So we do a radio show on Sunday nights, and I was curious if you think psychedelics can be used as medicine.
Yeah, they can be. It's actually being used in an experimental way by the VA in Washington, D.C. to treat PTSD. So I do. I believe in it. I think you have to take it on a case-by-case with some professional help and some guidance, or just talking to people who have a lot of experience with psychedelics. But there are some psyches that are good for it. Like if you notice, like the meth heads tend to be bipolar. There's this weird connection between bipolar and turning into a meth addict. But if you can spin that around and take some psychedelic drugs like mushrooms, for instance, you could use that in a therapeutic way, just like we use pot in a therapeutic way. I use pot every day, and most of the time. I have PTSD. I have a lot of these mental problems, but it calms me down. So psychedelics can actually help you go through a lot of the things you're thinking about and look at them like in a mirror. So that's how I do it.
Portland, P for psychedelic. This has been On the Block Radio, person on the street, point of view.
Folks, welcome back to the show. This is your host, Andy Gurvich. We're speaking with Justin Panneck, and we kind of jumped the gun a little bit and got right into the end of the story, but I want to back up a little bit and get into the beginning of the story, because I think it'll become clear to our listeners why we had you on when we start unpacking that. So where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in well, it's not really a town, it's a city now, because it's grown very rapidly, but Jonesboro, Arkansas, which is... it's northeast Arkansas. It's less than an hour away from Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay. Wow.
Yep.
What was that like?
Well, it's, considered the Bible Belt.
Right.
And very waspy, squirrely religious ideology, conservative politics,
When I was in that part of the world, it's fascinating because when you meet people... they don't ask, like they ask you what's your home church.
Yeah.
And I think it's fascinating even just to walk up to somebody and start asking them about religion, but they don't even ask you, are you religious? Do you believe in God? It's just assumed. It's what's your which church do you go to? It's like what people greet each other in the supermarket with.
Well, it's also what church do you belong to, and what do you drive?
Oh, that's the other one, huh?
Is it a Ford or a Chevy?
Yeah, and the bigger the better, huh?
Right.
So, I mean, what did your parents do?
So my dad, he worked in a factory for a while, and then he ended up going to school for a little bit, and he became a lab technician with his brother, who's a dentist, and so he worked with my brother for a while, and recently just retired from doing that.
Did you guys have a religious family?
So my parents were not religious at all. In fact, my dad's version or idea of a god or a religious experience was riding his Harley through, the backcountry of Kentucky and the rolling hills of Tennessee. That was his god,
So, okay, that makes sense a little bit about where you're getting it from, though, that wanderlust. Yeah.
And my mother, she had a sort of a Catholic upbringing, but she was far from Catholic. She was not. So we never did. They didn't go to church, but I had to go because my grandparents went, and I actually have a really funny story about that, which is very similar to my main story about the whole church experience. So I don't know if I should.
Sure. Go ahead.
So my dad would, he would drop me off at church, and it was divided into two parts. It was like the Sunday school where all the kids go, right? And then the main event, which is the lecture, and I enjoyed the second part only because my grandparents were hilarious.
Really?
Yeah, my grandfather would just make all this hilarious commentary about people around. It was seriously like sitting with Joan Crawford and Jonathan Winters at the red carpet event.
Oh wow! Joan Rivers.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
And then my grandfather would fall asleep for a half hour and snore.
Oh, that's great. And so you enjoyed that part of it, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway. So my dad dropped me off one morning, and I was there early for Sunday school, and I absolutely just hated it. The kids there that were my age, they had this sort of prophets of the Caribbean glaze to their eyes.
Yeah.
And they knew that I was a spiritual tightrope walker, right? They just knew that I wasn't fully committed, and so they had this kind of proselytizing edge to them.
Oh, the other kids.
Yeah. But so anyway, I was sitting there.
How old were you?
I think I was probably about maybe 10.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was sitting there and I looked around. I'm like, well, no one's here yet. So I just got this urge to just get the hell out of there.
Yeah.
And I bolted for the high seas. I ran across the street.
Joined the circus, huh?
And I kid you not, when I looked back, there were these two men in suits and sunglasses with their walkie-talkies, looking like FBI agents.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that they were saying something like, "Oh, and by the way, I had a sort of the secret name for the preacher. I called him Porsche Vader." because he was like a sort of I had heard that he had an affair with his secretary, and he drove a Porsche and all this stuff. So anyway, it's like these guys were talking on their walkie-talkies, and I could imagine they were saying something like, "Yes, your overlord, we have a code red here, independent thinker. We're going to turn on the tractor beam on the Death Star and send out some TIE fighters and grab this rogue rebel."
Nothing worse than a curious 10-year-old to bring the whole goddamn thing crumbling down, huh?
Yeah. We'll crush the rebel army once and for all.
Yeah.
So I ran as fast as I could. I was kind of like Harrison Ford in The Fugitive,
Now, did you actually see these two guys, or was this?
I did.
Okay,
I actually saw them. So I was running through neighborhoods, ducking behind bushes. I was like really paranoid. So I had to stay away for an hour.
Didn't anybody tell you can't run from God, man?
Right. But I made it back to the big part, right? The main event.
Yeah.
And my grandparents were there. No one said anything, so I assumed I was good to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So when did you? So you were raised in this, but when did when I'm reading your story, you were saying that you felt confined living in Arkansas with the place, the war machine, the Christian nature of it. When did so it was clear to you, and you had this family that didn't really walk the line. So when did your personality really start to shape in a way that you realized you were different than that place, and you had outgrown it and were ready for something else in terms of what the world had to offer?
Yeah, it was during my senior year. I'd really kind of withdrawn my senior year. In fact, I was kind of being groomed to get a full ride scholarship, as I was in the band, and I was
you're a drummer, right?
Yeah, I was a drummer, percussionist. But I totally withdrew. I just sort of went into this deep sort of existential depression. It's funny that the state nickname is Land of Opportunity, but yet there was absolutely no opportunity.
Yeah, I think they were being ironic when they did that.
Yeah, right. But I was reading, I just started reading a lot. I was reading Kerouac and On the Road. I was like, wow. And I was, writing short stories and stuff. And I realized that, hey, if you want to be a good writer, you got to hit the high seas and create your own story, right? So that's what I wanted. I'm not going to let anyone create my own story here. I'm going to create my own story, and this is going to be a good way to actually find some good writing material.
Got to go experience some things, yeah.
Yeah, so I'd kind of, I wasn't really serious my senior year, so I only sort of hastily planned college and didn't really have a set plan at all.
And the music thing fell away at that point, or? Yeah,
exactly.
I was gonna say that existential angst is just a requirement for playing jazz. So
absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I had as soon as I graduated, I'd moved out. I think I mentioned this in the little piece that I sent you. But I was like one of the few recent graduates that had his own place, townhouse, and I was kind of an obscure geek, but I suddenly became like super popular
because you had Party Central, yeah.
And I realized, hey, I could charge money for these parties, and I was having like 3 keggers a week.
Wow,
that's like $300 a week or so, and rent was only like $300 a month. So I sort of basically had a little legitimate business going on. And that sort of gave me some confidence. I'm like, hey, I can just take off. So I started doing some planning, and what led me to this idea of going into the Marines.
Yeah, because what the fuck is this about?
Exactly. The furthest thing that even my parents were like, what the?
Yeah.
fuck is he doing? So I had this guy who just showed up out of nowhere. He was a drummer too, but he had moved from, I don't know, Minnesota or something. And we became close, and he mentioned that he was going into the Marines. And he asked me if I wanted to go. And I said, "You're insane." And he's like, "What's wrong with that?" And I'm like, "Well, I think you're right. I think we all need a little dose of insanity."
Yeah.
And I needed a launching pad, so I just kind of like went to the drawing board and started doing some hard thinking. And I just needed a cannon to shoot me westward.
Yeah, quite
basically.
literally. What year was this?
So this was 1993.
I loved what you said and what you wrote me. You said, you're going to be like the Woody Allen quote that you would travel the world, meet interesting people, and kill them.
Kill them, yeah, exactly.
So this was 93, so this is like Sarajevo time?
Yeah, about that, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so you enlisted?
Yeah, so I talked to my buddy. I was like, hey, I think I'm going to do this. But before that, what I'd done is I'd done some research. And I had to ensure myself that I would have an exit plan once I got there, right? And I'd done the research, and I had found out that you could get an entry-level separation fairly easily. And one of the ways to do that is to smoke yourself a nice big fat joint prior to going.
Now that's the point that I didn't understand. So you wanted to join, but you wanted to be thrown out immediately?
Yes.
What's the benefit of that?
So the benefit of that was that I needed to be immersed in the total institution. And it sounds completely insane, but I think once I start to talk about this a little more, it might start to make sense.
Sure.
But I needed to, as Daniel Pinchbeck would say, I needed to break open my head.
But how is, and I hear what you're saying, but how is... going into something like that and then leaving immediately doing that? Wouldn't you need to stay for a while in order to be immersed in the total institution?
Yeah, I was there for a month, and I'm telling you, man, it is so intense.
Yeah.
that just being there for a week is plenty of immersion.
Okay, so what happened? Yeah, keep going. So you thought you were going to smoke a doobie?
Yeah, so I enlisted, and prior to departure, just like a day before, I smoked some marijuana. And
sinner.
Yeah. And I had heard, too, that sometimes they might keep you if they like the cut of your jib.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, shit, I need another contingency plan here.
Yeah.
So what I did actually is I ended up failing the hearing test when I got there, just in case. And you're right. No one wants a deaf pothead toting around an M16.
You'd be surprised, man.
Yeah. So it was absolutely frightening taking that airplane.
And where'd you go to boot camp?
So it was in San Diego.
Okay.
And that's where I wanted to go, was the sunny beaches of California.
Of course, yeah. So basically, you wanted the free plane ticket out there.
Free plane ticket.
To Cali, yeah.
Free meals.
Yeah.
And actually, what's interesting is I got a check when I got out. It was like, I wasn't expecting that at all.
Wow.
It was like a severance package. It was kind of a sweet deal.
Good old government socialism right there, working hard at work. So what happened? So you got to San Diego. Uh-oh, you there?
Oh, I accidentally pushed the mute button there.
Okay.
Sorry.
No worries. So let's reset it. So you got to San Diego.
So got to San Diego. You get off the plane and you go directly across the hall to where the drill instructor is and all the other recruits. And I remember walking across that hall, scared shitless, of course. And there was a couple that walked past me, and they said, "Hey, there's your future on the other side waiting for you." I was like, "Oh my God, this is it,"
Yeah.
And then I thought about that day at church, like, hey, should I make a run for it? No, probably not a good idea.
Yeah, I might have.
Yeah, so as soon as you get on that bus, you get off, and it's just insane. I mean, my civilian skin, my constructed self, any illusion of manhood was just immediately stripped. Head shaved, uniform issued, dirty skivvies exchanged for clean military issue skivvies.
Yeah.
And I was in purgatory, and the first 2 days were just hell.
Really? How so? I mean, it sounds like it already, but like, what do you mean?
Yeah, so it's just the indoctrination and the shock of it.
Yeah.
And I knew that's what I wanted, but the first 2 days you don't get any sleep. So you're, going on 48 hours of no sleep. And
so your buddy was joining for real, and you went with him?
We didn't actually go in together, but he went, I think, a little earlier.
And you were trying to go, and your plan was to sometime as soon as possible you were going to join, go see the inside of this thing, but get bounced at some point early on.
That's the title of this is Belly of the Beast, right? And that's kind of what I wanted to do, was get into the belly of the beast. Just a completely ironic thing, and that's just, I guess, a reflection of my own sick, twisted, almost sort of a sense of humor.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of other people would have bought like a Volkswagen and started driving around the country, but
exactly. Yeah, it's weird when I reflect on it. Even though I couldn't necessarily articulate this vision at the time, it was really like a mythological journey of the hero, with threshold guardians and being in the belly of the whale and all this stuff. But it was an unconscious drive to do this sort of insane thing.
Before we go forward with the story, I want to hit the pause button there and ask you one of my questions, because I've been, in prepping for this interview, and I think about this kind of stuff a lot, as you do with the work that you and I both do. You've mentioned Campbell just there, the hero's journey. You mentioned Kerouac before. And then earlier you were talking about, how ayahuasca brought you back to this essential connection to nature and to yourself. And I see a lot there, and I want to try to quickly draw a thread between the three and then get you to comment on that. Is that all right?
Yeah.
This wanderlust that us white Western European men have. This goes back, and I'm a professor of literature as well, and I teach an ancient lit class, a world lit class, and we read Gilgamesh, which is the first story ever written down from 2350 BC. We read the Iliad and the Odyssey, and we read these stories of men who need to go out into the world to find themselves and encounter these beasts and demons, and that one's identity is forged in this cauldron of quest, right? And then you bring Kerouac up, who's kind of a modern notion of this, that you go out onto the road to discover yourself, right? And it's there that this essence of what you are sort of comes to fruition. And I get that, and I've experienced that. I still do experience that in many ways. And it's a very essential thing, and it's a very beautiful thing. And so to respond to that and to embrace that in a cognizant way, what's the word I'm looking for? In a conscious way, right, with intentionality, is very important. Now, the second part of that, right? This very wanderlust, I think, is a part of our undoing, because this is what leads to colonialism, right? This is what leads to the occupation and oppression of indigenous peoples. This European need to colonize, to go forth and conquer, right? To go out into the world to see and to appropriate, right? To make our own the other. And there's a very kind of evil side to it as well. And indigenous people, when they've met Europeans, have said over and over again that we're suffering from a disease that Paul Levy's book Wetiko calls it, a kind of spiritual cannibalism, that because we are uprooted from our traditions and from the land, that we have this kind of incessant need to go forth and find ourselves, right? And that we're always on this quest, right, further west, right, to find this thing that we've lost. And it isn't about going out into the world to find it. It's about going into the self to find it, and especially about reconnecting ourselves in a rooted sort of way to the earth. And so I would just wonder if you can comment on that quickly, if you see what I'm saying, this kind of dual nature of the hero's journey, of this Kerouacian desire to go out onto the road to discover oneself. It's kind of beautiful, and it can also be very self-obsessive and consuming.
Yeah, absolutely. I can agree with that. There's something I always think about, this notion of, going against the grain. Whatever it is you do, if you think that you're going against the grain, you're sort of carrying a piece of the grain that you're going against with you. Yeah. Right. So, but this journey for me, I think, was sort of, in a sense, sort of almost the opposite. There was this notion of sort of wanting to conquer the world, but in a sense, I just sort of let it conquer me. And I was scared shitless as a senior, and I still can't believe that I was able to do this. And I think part of it was because I finally just let go, and I let it just consume me.
Wow.
Right. I just
what exactly consumed you? This desire to...
Yeah, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And it makes perfect sense in retrospect. But I can see what you're saying. But for me, there was this element of just sort of letting some kind of force swallow me up.
It's fascinating, yeah. And I didn't mean to suggest that was a component of your choices, more that it's a component of... that it's sort of a dark shadow side of that choice, you know what I mean? That exists sort of out there in the world, not necessarily in conjunction with each individual choice to go forth, but just with the, you know what I mean? With the sort of gestalt of where we find ourselves as a civilization, if I use that word correctly.
Yeah, and it was a really good way to just kind of, face my shadow and my demons. I mean, I think if I would have grown up in a place like Oregon or something and been exposed to entheogens, I probably wouldn't have needed to do that.
Wow.
I feel that was kind of my psychedelic in a way.
You know what's interesting, before we go to our next break, is that there's a lot of studies being done, I'm sure you're aware of, excuse me, of psychedelics being used to treat PTSD in soldiers.
Oh, yeah.
And so if it's ironic to hear you say, had I been introduced to these, I might have never gone in. But on the other side of it, we see for guys that made that choice, we're finding them entheogens waiting for them on the other side to help reintegrate them. Because one of the real problems I see in our society is when people have transformative experiences, and that's really what our show's about, right? Is how people navigate this process of transformation. Sometimes transformation can be violent and ugly and difficult, right? I mean, we focus on beautiful transformations on this show, but that's not what, sometimes a hurricane creates transformation, or a tornado, or an earthquake as well. And so when someone's gone overseas, or just, whether or not you serve in active duty combat or not, which is a whole separate thing, but just the shock of being depersonalized and reprogrammed, like you just said, in a military context, when these people get out, there are very few mechanisms to help them reintegrate into the world, right, and into the culture from which they came. And I find this as well with like the Burning Man scene, right? So people go to these festivals and go take ayahuasca and have these mountaintop experiences, but then there's no way to reintegrate them back into the world. And so they have to sort of stay out and stay a part of festival culture.
Absolutely, that's so key. And a lot of people that I do ayahuasca with that are in this organized religious institution, they're doing ayahuasca on a pretty regular basis, but I don't think they integrate these experiences. And I was fortunate enough after this little Marine stint to have an entire year to myself. And I was going to talk about that later, but it was a perfect situation that allowed me to integrate exactly what I had done.
I think that's key, and we're going to go to break here in a second, so we'll get into that in our last segment. But I think that's key. The religious scholar Houston Smith, when he was talking about psychedelics, said that very thing, that two things that made him leery of these things really catching on as bona fide transformative experiences was the idea that transformation doesn't just involve the mountaintop, it also involves the valley as well.
Yeah.
And then secondarily, they have to be integrated, right? It's like the Christmas Christian or the Sunday Catholic who the rest of the week is just a selfish bastard, but then they are on Sunday with their hands up in the air praising the Lord, and that's not an integrated life. And so, we individually we need to seek out ways to integrate those things. But again, I think as a culture, we don't give people a path back. Even as an academic, you start talking in the wrong circles about studying consciousness, let alone ayahuasca. Right? Just be in the wrong academic circle and say the word consciousness and watch everybody's eyes roll and get up and walk away from the table.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so to study these things from an academic standpoint is even a risk of your credibility, right, in a sense, because there's just no way to integrate it back into the larger dialogue. I don't want to say no way, but there's been a lot of roadblocks put in place.
Yeah, I've taken an entire year off of ayahuasca to allow integration. I mean, you could take almost a lifetime. I mean, I know people who've done it just once or twice, and that's enough for them.
Yeah.
But you know what this reminds me of? Have you ever read Juris Caro Huismon?
No.
Against the Grain, or Against Nature. Beautiful, brilliant book. This book is better than sex. It's better than food. He's like the last of the bourgeois, and he has access to all these fine riches, but he detests the whole bourgeois lifestyle. He secludes himself from everyone. He studies Moreau paintings. He invents perfumes. He puts fur on his walls. He creates a garden of poisonous flowers, and he puts all these gemstones on his turtle, right? So he immerses himself in this rich inner life.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing.
Kind of reminds me of that. Is like you get a dose of it, and it's like you can step back for a while, and life itself is enough. In a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay, so we'll pick that up after the break. Life itself is enough. I like that as a theme.
Okay.
For the conversation. So you can stick around for one more segment?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, great. Folks, we're talking with Justin Panneck. I hope you know where you are at this point in the episode. We are at On the Block Radio. If you don't know what you're listening to, then welcome. We'll be right back after the break.
Hey, this is Mikey Siegel, consciousness hacker, and you are listening to On the Block Radio.
Many millions of years ago, a race of hyper-intelligent, pan-dimensional beings got so fed up with the constant bickering about the meaning of life that they commissioned two of their brightest and best to design and build a stupendous supercomputer to calculate the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
Oh, deep thought. We want you to tell us the answer.
The answer to what?
The answer to life, the universe, everything. We'd really like an answer. Something simple.
I have to think about that. Return to this place in exactly 7.5 million years. The answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything is 42.
42?
Yes, I thought it over quite thoroughly. It is, it's 42. It would have been simpler, of course, to have known what the actual question was.
But it was the question. The ultimate question. Of everything.
That's not a question. Only when you know the question will you know what the answer means.
Give us the ultimate question.
I can't, but there is one who can.
As a professor of religious studies, as a former pastor, it just reminds me of the fundamentalism I experienced in Christianity. You know what I mean? That there's an in crowd who've experienced this consciousness raising plant, and now they become fundamentalist about it. Now this is the only way people can experience transformation. Now that they've had the secrets of the universe open to them, they take on these kind of messiah complexes. You know what I mean? That there's just a lot that happens in and around the community of those who use and advocate for psychedelics that gets on my nerves. And Joe hits a lot of those points. You have to mention Pinchbeck. You have to mention Rick Straussman. You know what I mean? There's a handful of names you have to always mention in the conversation. And then at some point, somebody starts yammering on about MAO inhibitors and you know what I mean? Because that makes us sound scientific.
Right.
Oh, you know that the blah, 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 and there's an aminoamylase inhibitor in the body. and there's always some guy that starts holding forth on that as a way to, I guess, try to show some legitimacy to the thing or something. But so I'm always frustrated the conversation doesn't go further because we've hit on something here and we're at the beginning of it and there's some bona fide wonderful research being done on it. But sometimes I get frustrated from, these members of the quote unquote scene that are just content to repeat the same narrative over and over again. But the thing is with Joe is that he's not an academic, he's a celebrity. I don't even know if the guy went to college, right?
Right.
And so when you compare, the kinds of things he's talking about on the air with, say, Stern, and I'm a Howard Stern fan, I've said this before, right? Then you go back to Rogan and you go, oh my God, this guy is actually pretty bright. You know what I mean? Because when you look at him just as he's a stand-up comic and an athlete.
Right.
Right. And so just the fact that the guy knows who Rick Straussman is and is talking with Stanley Krippner on his show, then I go back to going, yeah, Rogan's doing something pretty exceptional.
Yeah.
Here. You know what I mean? Like he really is kind of a unique dude. Anyway, you were starting to say.
Oh yeah, I was going to say. I think bringing this back to the importance of integration, but also I have always thought it was so important to go beyond all this sort of mumbo jumbo and the scripts and talk about the actual experience. The problem is we don't really have it's beyond our language, but we can sort of develop the language. And that's what I liked about Terence McKenna was he was the ultimate poet in terms of how he was a bard. He was able to really richly describe these experiences on psychedelics and we had Dennis on the show, on Chris Ryan's show actually, Dennis McKenna, and got to talk to him, and he was great. And one of the things he said, which I just loved, was that science. I was talking to him about materialist science and a lot of the presuppositions and roadblocks that are in the way of those of us that are trying to study consciousness. When I study ancient religions, I'm looking at these things as technologies, as algorithms for accessing and expanding elevated states of empathic distress and of connectivity and consciousness. And he was right in line with that. And he said, science had to pronounce nature dead before they could start performing the autopsy. Yeah.
And he has a really interesting relationship with his brother. When you push him too much on Terence, he goes, Terence liked to tell stories. And there's this idea out there that Dennis is the real scientist and Terence was this goofball that went around fabricating things. And Dennis even plays into that a little bit when you talk to him. And I'm of the opinion that you need both. That you really need both men. Right, we need the data set, we need the science, and we need the data to go where the data goes, and we need to be basing our views on where the data takes us. However, there's a place for people that can weave. When Dennis said, "Oh, those are just stories," I would take the word "just" away from the front of it because narrative is how we traditionally have connected ourselves to the cosmos, is through story. And that's not anti-scientific at all. That's a very scientific understanding of the human animal. We are storytelling, story-making, and story-consuming creatures. And that hasn't changed at all, which is why there's people in my neighborhood right now lined up around the block waiting to get into Star Wars. Because they're addicted to stories, and we still are, right? And so I think both mindsets are needed, and I agree with you on Terrence. I used to listen to the Psychedelic Salon play these old lectures of his, some Esalen and everywhere, and I thought it was great. I mean, they were captivating.
Right.
So let's get back to your story. So you're in San Diego, you're there. So what happened? Like, how did it all shake out?
So one really interesting part before I got out was they put me in a special barracks with other recruits who had similar situations, right?
all the deaf potheads.
Not a story like mine, of course, but maybe they were just they didn't think it through or something. Yeah. Or they had this what they called moment of truth, where it's like, okay, you got to come forward if you didn't admit to huffing computer cleaner a year ago. Or right? So he had a lot of these people, and then they put you in this special barracks. It was kind of like the Island of Misfit Toys.
Wow.
You know, King Moonracer was our drill instructor.
You're like, I'm good, man. You know, I mean, death to America, but other than that, I'm fine, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what? So you're in with these.
So
I see this would be a great like comedy of like. The barracks get attacked, and then like those guys are the only ones that can save the day. You know, this group of stoners and misfits,
the underdog.
Yeah,
and it was such a
Jonah Hill will be in there with you.
Exactly, it was such a rich character study. I mean, the whole experience was insane and fascinating.
Yeah.
One thing I have to mention is the scariest part of the day was going to Chow Hall, where you had to line up A to B, ass to belly button, and on the other side you had third phase recruits. These guys had been there for 3 months. They were on their way out of training, and you'd have to yell at them for your food, basically, like eggs recruit, bacon recruit. and one day I had a slight accent. Being from Arkansas, and I was like, the way I said beans, I was like, beans, recruit, and they laughed at me.
Yeah.
I didn't get my beans that day.
Oh.
It sucked. And I saw another guy, he had this tag on that said double rations. I'm like, where do I get one of those?
Yeah.
I'm a phony fucker, man. And I didn't get my beans today.
This is like the Woody Harrelson story in Wag the Dog, man. I don't know if you saw that movie, but he's going off on not getting his beans in prison, and he starts freaking out. That's fun. Hey, but I mean, it's funny, but it's not, especially when you're in that kind of situation. And there's there's so much psychological, emotional, and physical strain being put on you if you don't get your calories, man. I mean, that's you're not sleeping, and then you don't get your food too. Jesus, it really can break you down.
Yeah, but I even though I was there for like a month, I'd gained like 30 pounds.
Jesus.
I mean, it was
muscle, right?
Yeah.
So what happened? So why were you only there a month?
Yeah, so
I don't want to say only. I'd last 7 minutes in a Marine barracks, but
I did the moment of truth, and told him I did smoke some pot, and then you're assigned a counselor, and they talk to you, and then you're waiting for a couple days, and then they're like, all right, well, we're going to give you an entry-level separation, and then they put you in a special barracks with other people who are awaiting their departure as well, and then you're out.
Wow.
And they gave me a free bus ticket back home, but I went to the bus station and talked to the clerk. I'm like, hey, I need to delay my travel because the point of doing this whole thing was to comb the beaches and write my journal.
Yeah.
Right, so it wasn't a problem, and I called my mom on the payphone. I'm like, "Hey, you probably heard from the recruiter what happened, right?" And she's like, "Yeah," and I'm like, "Hey, we have some relatives that live in California, right?" Mm-hmm. And I remember when I was like 4, we had visited some relatives in that area, and I got some phone numbers, and here I am calling up an aunt that I hadn't seen in 14 years. Hey, I just got out of the Marines. I'm at the bus station in San Diego. Want to pick me up? So sure enough, yeah.
It sounds so dignified when you say, I just got out of the Marines.
Right, yeah. I just served my time.
Yeah. You know, they had me kill Milosevic, and then here I am. I want to hang out.
Right, yeah.
So what happened? She took you in?
Yeah, so she took me in, and I discovered that my grandfather's brother lived in L.A. He's a really cool retired judge, and he's got 2 kids. And so I got stoned. I went shark fishing. I went out to nice restaurants. So I'd finally made it to the promised land.
Besides the shark fishing, that's pretty much my day.
Yeah.
So you were out there, yeah. And so what, you're 19, 18?
18, okay. Yeah. And
now, had you traveled much in the country outside of Arkansas before that?
That I had not.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I met a guy the other day. A friend of mine came over, and he brought a guy with him who was from Arkansas, and he was from the what's the mountain range? One of the big ones there.
Oh, the Ozarks?
Yeah. He was from the base of the Ozarks, and I forgot the town, but he lived right at the base of them. And I'm sure there's dozens, but and he had never been out. He flew to Portland to visit my friend, and my friend brought him over here, like from the airport, and the guy was like wide-eyed. He might as well have been in Tibet or something. He couldn't. He was totally disoriented. And Portland was like New York City to him. It was this massive thing because he'd never been out of this town, and there's probably 5,000 people in the town.
Yeah, it was a pretty unique experience for me, and I actually ended up going. I took that bus ticket back home, but I said my goodbyes. I'm like, I'm not staying in Arkansas, and I'd made plans to move to Boulder, Colorado.
Was it already different when you went back? It's the same. The weird thing about the hometown is that in some aspects of it never changed. But even that small experience in California, did you have new eyes, like Proust says?
Absolutely. My relationship with my father was different.
How so?
Here's one good example, actually. So before I left, had I, let's say, rolled a joint or something, and he saw me with marijuana, I would have been in trouble. I came back, and there was a situation in which that happened, and he was totally cool. In fact, I shared some with him, and that would have never happened. It was like I had been accepted by him.
Wow, interesting.
On a different level.
That you would cross some threshold. Did you guys talk about it ever, or was it just kind of unspoken?
It was unspoken because it was such a shocking experience for me that I hadn't really had time to integrate it and completely wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
And we talked about just how insane it was, but I was only there for a couple weeks, and I ended up taking a bus to Boulder, Colorado.
How'd you decide to go there?
Well, I wanted to go to school there, and I had visited there, or I had a friend of mine had visited there, and it seemed like a really cool place, and I sort of set my sights on the university there, and so I stayed. I moved there and lived there, and I had this entire basement of this house to myself, and I just hung out and listened to CDs and thought about my experience, and it was perfect, you know.
That's where you were saying you had a year,
right? Yeah,
kind of on your own. And how did you go from that to getting a psychology degree and studying consciousness and stuff?
Yeah, so I'd always been interested in the mind and behavior, and so I enrolled in the university there, and I studied psychology and also film and philosophy and things like that. I was always interested in things like that. And it wasn't until much later that I got interested in consciousness.
What did you think you were going to do? Did you think you were going to be like a therapist or?
Yeah, just a therapist, basically.
Yeah. Okay, and how far did you go in your education?
So I had completed a degree in psychology and communication, and ended up being a mediator. I was a mediator for the city for a little while. And then I decided to move to Portland because my mother had moved there, and it seemed like a sweet spot. And so, I was, working as a consultant. I didn't actually get into graduate school at the time until much later, probably 5 years later.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And where'd you go to grad school?
So, Walden University, which is a University of Minnesota sister school.
Yeah.
It's up in Minneapolis.
Uh-huh.
So I didn't actually live there, but I had to fly out there to do residencies.
Yeah,
and
that's
things
what
like that.
the CIIS program that I was like briefly in. Like my PhD program was similar to your time in the Marines. I went to a place, smoked a bunch of weed, stayed
That's
for a
a
couple
great
weeks,
school.
and then they threw me out. Yeah, it is. I just didn't have the money to stay in the program.
I actually did a talk there at CIIS maybe 3 years ago.
Oh, really? I did too. That's interesting.
Oh, cool.
For their consciousness conference?
Well, it was there's a organization that was developed by one of the grad students there, Larry, blanking on his last name, but it's called ERIE.
Okay.
Entheogenic Research, Integration, Education.
Okay.
And he puts on talks, and I did an hour-long talk and then a panel with one of the professors there.
Was it Leslie Combs, or do you remember who it was?
No, it was Craig. He heads the eco-psychology.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Craig
Jennifer something works in that department now too. I'm forgetting her last name, but we have a few colleagues in the SAC. Dennis. Oh gosh, why is his last name escaping me? And also Tina Fields. There's a few eco-psychologists.
Oh, Tina Fields, yeah.
Yeah, among us in the SAC. Dennis's name will come to me in a minute. It's going to freak me out. I'll add it to the show notes once I remember it later. But This is a great discipline, right? Especially now in this time of environmental uncertainty and change. This is something that through the lens of psychology studies how our connection to the earth affects our well-being and our state of mind, and how that relationship is reciprocal. And one of the things it's increasingly studying is the sense of PTSD and hopelessness and depression and anxiety that's coming along with an environmental collapse and species die-off and stuff. So it's a fascinating field for people to look into because it's something that explains a lot about the sort of constant level of anxiety that you see in people, right, in the modern world, right? It's one of the things that, there's some economic and other factors there as well, but this kind of body awareness that we have. Because regardless of your political position, regardless of your conspiracy theorist, regardless of where, if you think climate change is a hoax, the cells in your body know that things are changing. They know the air's different. You know what I mean? They know things are, it knows that something's happening. And some of us have let that knowledge move from the somatic nervous system up into the levels of consciousness. Others keep it buried, but nonetheless, your body knows what's happening.
Yeah, and again, I like to study what's going on in culture, which represents some of these notions and desires to connect to nature. One of these is the whole Sasquatch phenomenon, which I find very fascinating. I had a friend. Have a good friend actually who had an experience, a life-changing experience, so much so that he was a hunter. He sold all of his hunting equipment, and he's like, I'm not going out in the woods again after seeing that 10-foot tall hairy giant.
Really?
I mean, and what's interesting about the whole phenomenon is it kind of represents a type of green psychology.
Yeah.
That if we cannot believe that a great ape-like hairy beast can live off of the land in millions of acres, which is entirely possible.
Right.
I mean, there's like 60 World War II planes out there, and only one's been found.
Oh, that's interesting.
But then we've lost something profound if we cannot believe that. And it kind of, these creatures are, they're part of nature, but they stand beyond nature.
What does it mean to have fully conquered the natural world? And so where there's no mystery or wildness left to it and left to ourselves? That's a really, really fascinating question.
Yeah.
I met a guy recently who wanted to come on the show who wrote me and billed himself as an amateur Bigfoot hunter, and I laughed because my immediate question was, how does one go pro in that exactly? And I guess the answer is you get paid for it, right? I mean, but I don't know what it is to be a professional Bigfoot hunter any more than I would know what it means to be a professional.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because it also represents
hunter.
this sort of power of the people, where it's like mainstream science doesn't want to touch it, and so all these people are taking it up in their own hands.
Yeah.
But I think professionals they have like maybe podcasts, and they have an actual business where people call them and say, hey, there's a hairy beast stealing my chickens. Can you come out here? You know, that kind of thing.
Did you see that movie? It's not a Herzog movie, but he's in it. He plays it. If you're watching it, you would think it's a Herzog documentary, at least at first. It's called Incident at Loch Ness.
You know, I think I did see that.
Yeah,
actually.
It's worth checking out. And if our audience hasn't seen it, they need to check it out. And what's fascinating about it, again, I think the film was made by somebody else, but Herzog stars in it as himself directing this movie. And the film starts, I don't want to spoil it for the audience, but it starts as a documentary about a myth, right? And so the whole premise is that this is a documentary film about the people that believe in the Loch Ness Monster. Now, obviously, there's no such thing, but we're fascinated in why people believe in it still, right? And so it's a documentary about a real movie about this fake monster, right? And then as the film goes on, suddenly it flips, and then it becomes a fake movie, or not a fake movie, but a drama or a comedy. You know what I mean? So a non-documentary, a fictional piece about a real monster. Right.
Yeah.
Suddenly the monster becomes real and the film becomes fake, and I loved the dichotomy there because it plays with both things. Right. It plays with this inside-outside of the monster, and I have literature on the brain because I just taught this World Lit class. But this is how we explored Grendel in our discussion on Beowulf in my writing class or my lit class, right? Is this what is Grendel from the outside, but what is Grendel on the inside? What does he represent? Why does he only show up when the soldiers are drunk? What is it about warrior men in a drunken state that brings out this monster of destruction? You know what I mean? Like we talked about it from several levels, and I think that's where it gets interesting. Is there a Bigfoot or not? That's a kind of an interesting question, to answer, but I'm far more interested in the psychological question there.
That's what I'm interested in, too.
Absolutely. What does it mean, and what does it mean about how we think about the natural world around us?
Yeah, because here you have these people with, Gen 3 night vision goggles and GoPros and thermal imaging stumbling around in the woods, and it's just a perfect kind of metaphor in a sense. I always like what Mitch Hedgeberg said. He said, well, the reason Sasquatch is blurry is because maybe he is actually blurry.
I love comedians that make these profound points.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we're heading towards the end of our third break, but I just wanted to which is the end of the show. So I just wanted to get a couple more things from you. So what are you doing now? So you work, so you went to graduate school and then you started. Did you start a practice, or how did that translate into work?
That was the goal. I actually ended up switching midstream into health psychology, which explores behavioral medicine and healing, and that's when I got interested in ayahuasca and shamanism. But so that didn't allow me to get licensure, but recently I just started school again so I can get my license.
Oh, cool.
And so I'm going to eventually, within a year or two, go into private practice. But go ahead.
No, your work with the ayahuasca folks. What's the name of that organization again?
There's no actual name. It's just it's just like ayahuasca research group.
And these are different academics who are studying this plant medicine from the inside, right? Through taking it and then also studying the physical and psychological effects. Are you continuing to work with them?
Yeah, working with them, and
there was just a ruling, right? And I totally interrupted you, but wasn't there just a major ruling in the country that's allowing for that ayahuasca church to set up?
Well, this happened about under the Religious Freedom Act.
Yeah.
The Santo Daime Church was allowed to legally use ayahuasca as a sacrament.
Yeah. And that started, their first outpost in North America was here in Portland. Is that correct?
It was actually in, I think, Bend, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, but so I'm, my whole, interest is to get onto lecture circuits, and so this past summer, I was at the Exploring Psychedelics conference in Ashland, Oregon, and it was a very interesting talk because I was able to just explore a lot of different topics. I mean, just a ton of different things. And part of it was also this kind of spoken word kind of, poetic type of thing that I like to do. And there were a couple people afterwards that said, your talk kind of reminded me of Terence McKenna because of the way I use my wording and make it poetic. And that's my whole interest, is to, just use words in a new and interesting way to kind of change the way we think about the world.
There's a guy we work with at the SAC named Joshua Levin who does very similar things, and also another guy named Mikey Siegel who we're going to have on the program in the coming weeks. I've seen, you remind me of the two of them. All three of you kind of hit that same place where you're kind of a new generation of scholars who are rigorous and who are devoted to doing the science, but also bring the experiential into it, and then also pay attention to the kind of artistry of delivery. And I think a lot of scientists, a lot of people that do this kind of work don't do that, right? They've been taught to just be objective and publish the data and keep any kind of subjective experiential component out of it. And again, I think this is a profound mistake. It's not going to change people's hearts.
Yeah, I've always had an aversion to statistical data, and I just cannot go there. I've always been interested in the subjective reality, and but I also am working on a book. I did publish a book about 4 years ago.
Okay, what was that book?
Called The Night of Darkwood. The Last Tree Whisperer. And it's a fiction work. It's a kind of fantasy, satire, amateur detective genre.
Cool.
It's actually kind of semi-autobiographical. I included that story, the Marine story, but I put a twist on it. And I had a few other really interesting adventures that I put into that book.
That's cool. And you're working on a new one, and people can get that like Amazon and stuff?
Amazon, pretty much anywhere
Pals.
they sell books.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're working on a new one, you say?
Working on a new one called With Love from Ghana. And this is actually about, well, I'm working on two, actually. So this Love from Ghana thing is an interesting thing that I started doing 5 years ago. And so those inheritance scams.
Yeah.
So I got my first one like 5 years ago, and I like to, the world is my laboratory. I like to just fuck with people as much as I can.
Yeah.
And so I ended up emailing this guy back with this whole story, like, hey, I'm going to sell my business, and I've got my 3 wise attorneys, Mazaru, and, and all this jazz, and I ended up calling this guy, and
this guy's just trying to get your credit card number, but you're playing. Wow.
And he was like, he was befuddled, and it was hilarious. So, and these stories are just elaborate, like the stuff that I come up with, and then so I'm kind of compiling that into a book.
That's pretty cool. I got an email from the Russian mail order bride things, and I was fucking with them too, so I ordered I ordered one. I didn't realize that she actually would show up. Svetlana at the house. I just have her cook and clean now, but it's no big deal. I'm totally kidding. We're going to cut that out later, right, Mike? So as we wrap up here, man, what do you want to say to the audience? There's the potential that you're talking, to anywhere from 8 to 12 people right now. So since you have this captive audience, I'm kidding. It's much more than that. But since you have an audience of folks that are listening to the conversation, what do you want to say to them, especially about, maybe your work with plant hallucinogenics? What's the takeaway?
Yeah, so, I want to speak on two things. Sure. One is, this whole story with the Marines, what I call an act of cultural assassination. Was it insane? Yes, insofar as sanity is a socially constructed category that serves the maintenance of dominant narratives and power structures. And if so, it's time to be insane together. It's time to violate consensus reality. But I have trouble believing that as a society we tend to be constantly dissatisfied and unsettled when we've achieved such a great deal of comfort and security.
Yeah.
And this is my plight and my personal motive behind these acts of insanity, and also exploring psychedelics, because when you're able to explore psychedelics, but also take the time to really integrate the experience, synthesize it, talk to people about it, try to use words or your language in a new way to wrap yourself around what's really happening. And then once you do that, you'll start to see things with kind of new lenses.
That's really interesting. As we close here, there's a lot of people that I respect in the world and doing the in and out of the work we do together here, and both of us, I think, have an appreciation for comedians, especially good comedians, and by that I mean not only funny people, but people who use humor as a way to show us, a mirror of ourselves in a new way. And Louis C.K. is one of those guys, and he talks regularly about having to do things about comfort is the enemy of comedy. He went in to be interviewed on Stern once, and he stood up. He didn't want to sit on the couch because he was like, if I sit down, I get comfortable, and if I get comfortable, I lose my edge. But that edge helps him see differently, and I think that's what you're talking about, right? I use a Rumi quote regularly that unless the ground has been tilled, nothing new can grow, and I think that's what I hear you talking about, is that what psychedelics did for you was help break that ground up, that ground of being encultured a certain way and being raised to see a certain way and having a set of expectations and limitations put on you, that psychedelics help you break that ground up so that the potential for something new to grow came out of it. Is that what I hear you saying?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's also about being able to come to this awareness that the world really is kind of flimsy and hackable, right? I mean, we can create our own story. And so that's sort of my question and my challenge to everyone is, which story is most aligned with who you truly are and who you truly want to be? And each of us can pioneer a unique part of the territory of this new story, or the territory of what Charles Eisenstein calls the territory of reunion.
That's awesome. That's a great way to end.
Yeah.
Justin Panneck, thanks for being on the program, man. This has been a great talk. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Will you come on again down the road to keep us updated on your research and maybe dive into some more of your story?
You bet.
Awesome. We look forward to it.
All right.
All right, folks, you've been listening to On the Block Radio. Thanks for hanging in there with us. Our guest has been psychonaut, agitator, former Marine, Justin Panneck. Go check out his books online where you can find books, and we will provide links to them at our website On the Block Radio as well. And we thank you for being with us. We will see you on the other side.
You've been listening to On the Block with Andrew Gurevich. The show is produced in Portland, Oregon by Michael DiNapoli at MD Productions. Theme music by Cat Power. Closing music by Jonathan Oak. Look us up on the web at ontheblockradio.com, where you can also link to us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Don't forget to tune in next week for a brand new episode. Previous episodes can be found on our website. Thanks for listening.
Oh, you beautiful kitties. Oh, look at you out there. Creators of art, of history, of thought.